Alright, you know what this channel is missing? A battle. A good old-fashioned battle. Sega Genesis versus Super Nintendo. It's a good thing the internet didn't exist. When it was Super Nintendo versus Sega Genesis, the internet would have exploded, the universe would have exploded, and all life would have ended. That's how intense that battle was. Fights were happening in the playground. Almost 30 years later, grown men, 30 to 40 years old, are still fighting over this. Today is a different video. I'm going to appreciate what the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo brought to the table. So today's video, Strider versus Super Castlevania 4. And I will explain those two choices here in a second. But let's set a baseline first. Today's baseline, we're going to take a look at a Nintendo game that not many people know about. SNES. From a company called Jalico. Long gone. They've been dead for decades. So let's take a look at this underrated game and take a look at what an action game on the NES looked like. Okay, so why SNES? Okay, this was made in 1990. Perfect timing. Okay, SNES is the game I'm using as a baseline because it's a game not many people know about, but it's a very good NES game. And what made this NES game good? The music is really good and the character graphics are big. Not many NES games had big character graphics. So this is SNES, excellent music, very good graphics for the 8-bit NES. So this game was 1990. Perfect timing. Strider, the arcade game, came out in 89, and Super Castlevania 4 came out in 91. The Genesis port of Strider came out in 1990. So it's perfect. So a very good game. Love the music in this game. If I'm not talking, it's because I'm listening to the tunes, man. I love this song. This is a MP3 player song, along with the boss song in this game. Yeah, it's a game not many people know about. I'm just gonna breeze through this right now. Yeah, I gotta do a review on this game, but I'm gonna give it somewhere around an 8. See the little power meter? I'm letting it charge up so my hits are stronger. So there are mechanics to this game. There's magic. I used my magic earlier. I'll use my magic now. Okay, here's the limits of the NES. See how the background went completely black? It's because of graphics limitations. Because they put a big boss on screen. This is a big boss for an NES game. These are big character graphics for an NES game. But they have to compromise and make the background totally black to be able to pull this off. Listen to this song. What a great song. I'm not going to talk, just so you can listen to this song. Very simple boss. Okay, so that's SNES. So that's a NES game from 1990. Now, enter the Sega Genesis with Strider. Arcade port, 1989. Genesis game arcade game, 1989. Genesis port, 1990. So same time as SNES. Let me turn the dial here. Now we're gonna play Genesis. This is played on the Retron 3. So now enter the Sega Genesis 16-bit era. I don't know why the volume's low on the Genesis part of the Retron 3, but here we go, Strider. This really showcased what the Sega Genesis was capable of when this game came out.
You only use 3, bud.
That was my Castlevania review. I'm like putting all this together. Here we go. So when this game came out, it was really a showcase of what the Sega Genesis can do. Graphics-wise, the music, the speed. Look how much faster it is than an Astion X. A different style of music. Astion X had great music. I'm not knocking the music, but it was a great song. All three of these games had great songs. In fact, I'm just going to title this Astion X is kind of the odd game in here, but yeah, this we'll include Astion X in the description and the title. I mean, it's part of this video. It's a battle. I mean, it's outgunned. So the Sega Genesis is a Corvette. The Super Nintendo is a Porsche, and Astion X is like a Mazda Miata. Still fun, but it's a little bit outclassed. Look at this boss. It's Ivan Drago from Rocky IV. Too bad he's easy. So multiple scrolling background parallax, so you can see layers in the background. Astion X did not have that, obviously. It was just limited, couldn't pull it off. Very few Nintendo games had multiple layers like this. It was like one static background in regular Nintendo. An excellent game. I gave this game a 9 out of 10. It's not the best game ever, a little shallow, but I gave it a 9 just because of what it is and what it represented at the time. I mean, look how much they're throwing on screen at once. Just tearing everyone up, man. So this was the next evolution in gaming right here. Nintendo came out in 85, and Sega Genesis came out in 89, so, you know, Nintendo had the market to itself for basically, what's that, 4 years? And then Sega came out with the Genesis, you know, to give Nintendo some competition, and they had 4 years to develop something bigger, something better than the Nintendo, the NES. Nintendo's still a great system, but yeah, this was the next step in gaming. There you go, good run, good clean run, didn't die. Now, Nintendo had to respond after games like Strider. Astion X obviously can't compete with Strider, so Nintendo needed an answer. The answer was Super Nintendo. So Genesis came out in 89, Super Nintendo came out 2 years later, and this is what they had to offer. Super Castlevania 4, first generation title. Strider was a first generation title, maybe second generation title for the Genesis. So now, next step up is Super Castlevania 4, if it wants to start up here. Come on, Nintendo, don't be scared. You're alright. You're okay. Let's try that again. You had to participate in this battle here. Super Nintendo. Alright, here we go. Now the Super Nintendo portion is loud, man. This Retron's weird. Okay. All being played on the Retron 3. Okay, so reason why I'm going with Strider versus Super Castlevania 4. When I reviewed Super Castlevania 4 a couple of days ago, it reminded me of Strider. Just for the reason of, okay, this is the next step in technology. Now, it wasn't as big a jump as Strider versus Astion X, but there are differences. Nintendo, with the Super Nintendo, brought out a more refined look than the Genesis. The reason I like using the Porsche analogy versus Corvette is I love cars a lot, and that's what it reminds me of. Corvette's a little rough around the edges, fast, raw. That's the Sega Genesis. Super Nintendo was more refined, like a Porsche. So I like that analogy a lot. I'm not saying one's better than the other. I was more of a Sega fan than I was a Nintendo fan. I'm more of a Corvette fan than I am a Porsche fan, but I appreciate all of it. I gave Strider a 9. and I gave Super Castlevania 4 a 9.1. This is a better game than Strider. It's more refined than Strider is. It has more depth. Strider's a very shallow game. This game has more depth. But both very good. Both at the time of their release really showcased technology. Like Strider, this game has multiple layers. Nintendo couldn't pull that off. Regular NES couldn't pull off parallax scrolling. What I mean by that, let me point this out. See the initial background, then this background scrolls behind it. That's what parallax is for the youngsters out there watching this. This is going to be a nostalgic video for the older guys. For the youngsters, it's a history lesson. Super Nintendo had a more orchestra-like soundtrack. When you listen to the soundtrack versus Strider, it's more orchestra-like. All good songs. Astyanax had a good song. Strider has good music, and this game has good music, but all very different. This definitely sounds more orchestra-like. Good stuff. All good games. So, what I enjoyed about Super Nintendo versus Genesis, both companies, they had to one-up each other. And even though the Genesis was behind in technology, they pulled out some good games. I mean, Strider was 1990. Yeah, this game, it's all in the matter of opinion. It's different styles of graphics. Strider was a faster game. This game's slower, more methodical, but more refined. So this isn't even though I rated Castlevania higher, I don't want to really talk about what game's better. It's just taking a look at different technology and how they utilize it. Strider's more speed, a lot of style. This game was also very stylish, but in a more methodical method. Strider was fast. And Astyanax, not the most technologically advanced game, but very good for what a Nintendo game is. That's why I like using that game. The music was very good. It had big characters. In fact, the character in Astyanax is as big. The character graphics are as big as this, just not as detailed. But very uncommon for Nintendo to have big character graphics. But obviously, Nintendo just didn't have the power to compete with Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. Obviously, I mean, 1985 technology, Sega Genesis was 88, 89 technology, Super Nintendo's 1990 and 91 technology. But see, I mean, it is what, it's, that's the case now. Let's look at Xbox. When it came out, it was more powerful than PlayStation 2 because, they had the extra years to make a more powerful system. And this was the case with Super Nintendo. It had time. Sega Genesis had time over the NES. Now the Super Nintendo had time over the Genesis to create a better looking game. So I'm going to do the same thing. Let's get to the boss. Great tune. All three games, all three of these first levels, I have it in my MP3 player. The moments I'm not talking, I'm just enjoying the music, and I want you guys to enjoy the music too. But yeah, I'm not talking about who's better today. That creates fights on the internet. This is just all appreciation. I mean, I'm gonna say it. I'm not gonna deny it. I like the Sega Genesis more than I like the Super Nintendo. But I'm 35 fucking years old, man. The war's over. The war died in 94, 95. It's been a long time. But hey, you know what? These two systems are so influential that people are still fighting over it. And, what does that say about the greatness of both systems? The war ended in 95-ish. 94, 95, the war ended. By the time 95 came around, PlayStation 1 was around. Nintendo 64 was coming. Sega Saturn was out, so the war was done by 95. But man, from 91 to around 94, 95, it was a battle. It was definitely a battle, and like I said, it's a good thing the internet didn't exist back then, because there was passion, man. There was passion for this topic. I might die. Okay, let's play this boss with a little skill. Pretty simple pattern. There you go. Nothing I can't handle. So, there you go. Nostalgia for the older guys and gals. History lesson to the youngsters. Nintendo, 85. Sega Genesis, 1988, 89. Super Nintendo, 90, 91. You can see the progression. Not as big a jump from Genesis to Super Nintendo, but huge jump from regular Nintendo to Sega Genesis. And these are 2 or 3 great examples of the technology at the time. And all games came around 1990, 1990, and 1991 for Super Castlevania 4. Good stuff. Alright, I think I will upload this a day after my Castlevania 4 video. So, happy Saturday. Have a great weekend.